great pleasure to introduce these two gentlemen. Todd and I have known each other for quite some time. We've done some work together with the Roundabout Watercraft, especially in the duck hunting level. It's worked really well. And Mr. Glen Pla of Anglertown. You guys might know Glenn from his previous venture that was on, was it Bay News 9 or Bright House Sports. So now they're looking to get another one together, and they're going to be our speakers today. So, gentlemen, this is all yours.
Yeah, wouldn't it have been cool if I hadn't arrived and it was just Roger here and he had my hat on and he was Glen Pla? Forever young.
We got a problem.
18 years in the sun, that'll do it. That'll do it, won't you? Anglertown is, well, let me back up from Anglertown. Before Anglertown, I was average angler for 18 years. And that was with Bright House. Spectrum came in, and in that 2-year period at the end of Spectrum, they had me doing segments instead of a 30-minute show of Average Angler. Segments of Average Angler and segments of Out There. So I was riding horses at Palmasola, feeding big crocodiles. It was just kind of an odd kind of thing that they had me fall into. But I did that for 2 years, so I was kind of like a Steve Irwin fishing guy. But I learned a lot, and it opened up some avenues for me as far as that out there stuff. I'm a Florida native, third generation. Roger's the fourth, and so it gave me a chance to see more of Florida, which I surely love. And so Anglertown, after Spectrum, Canby, and Bill Miller, and the whole high school sports, I decided, well, do I really want to go back to this? And I decided I still had some stories to tell. I like telling stories. I like characters. I like fishing. I like outdoors. I like Florida history. So Anglertown came about really because of a few sponsors that have stepped aboard. Carbon Marine, Osprey Bay, Betts, Lee Fisher, and of course Roundabout Boats is our main sponsor. And Todd really has helped me move forward in trying to make Anglertown a reality. If you look on the back, those two fellows right there, I'm wearing the same shirt. I'm wearing the same shirt. Look at that. Oh well, at least we washed them. Oh, I did.
It's a brand new shirt.
Anyway,
Sure.
Todd used to come on Average Angler as kind of a villainous type fella, and
Yeah, he made me do things that even my wife would just shake her head.
We were in conflict a lot. So I decided to kind of bring that element into this, where it's two fishing hosts trying to do a fishing show, but they don't get along. So that kind of gives you a picture of what this is going to be.
So basically, it's like two brothers fishing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And, you know, we have mishaps and things along the way. So that's the end game for Anglertown. Anglertown right now exists as a website and Facebook, and video will come down the road, and hopefully we'll be able to get a full-fledged 30-minute show with us in it, and bring back maybe some of the old characters that used to be on Average Angler, like Hoom Daddy, Jackie, Otto, and maybe Dave Pomalu, Matt Snooker stuff, and the HUD, people like that. So that's where it's going, and that's where we're at right now with this. So
Yeah, it's kind of a growing thing that, as you've learned, it's not an easy road at all.
no,
No.
no,
And,
of course not.
But
You know, 18 years ago, I was in this,
Yeah.
and then Average Angler came along, and they wanted me to start producing that show, as well as some of Hooked on Fishing, and then they said, why don't you go ahead and host Average Angler, and then that's how that all came about. But before that, Captain Mel, me, Bill, we've all been down the sponsorship road. We all know what it's like, and it's a tough road to get people to believe in you and to believe in a project or a dream. And so Anglertown is is kind of that little star right there that we're hoping that can live again and see how people react to it. Would you guys like to see a fishing show?
Yeah.
With
I've never heard of daggone Canadian daggone fishing shows. Crazy. God.
no Canadian fishing shows, and we probably won't go to
World
Brazil
Fishing
too
Network
much
drives
either.
me nuts with that craziness.
But what we're going to do tonight is something a little bit different. We're going to be a little bit more interactive because I believe back when I was guiding, I guided for 6 years in Tampa Bay. I've been fishing Tampa Bay, not as long as that gentleman in the back, but for 30 years. I can't believe I can say that because I feel like I'm 20 still, but I've learned a lot and I still learn something new every time I go out. And that's the neat thing about it is that if you don't go out and learn something new, then you might as well just hang it up and say you're done, because everything's so changing in Tampa Bay because there's so many people coming into Riverview, Apollo Beach, Ruskin area, that there's more and more people, even during the week when you go out, it's a madhouse. And you kind of sit there and you think, okay, I'm going to have to readjust what I'm doing. And that's exactly what I've done. And that's what I even was doing when I was guiding, was there were so many people in the water that I needed to kind of adjust and do things a little bit differently. I'm one of the guides that you very rarely would ever see beating the bushes. I hated mangrove fishing, especially with my clients, because we were constantly squirrel fishing. It was in the trees, in the trees, in the trees. So I learned to adapt and go out and fish the open flat water. And with pretty good success is knowing what you're looking for. And we're going to kind of go through that. We're going to start with planning your trip. And both Glenn and I have different ways of doing things. But we're going to go and start with planning your trip, what we look for, what we sit down at the computer and say, okay, what are the tides doing? What are the salooner periods doing? Because a lot of people don't follow the salooner periods. And I'll tell you right now, from fact, when I was a guide, it was very important to follow those salooner tides. And my clients got so adapted to that when they called for a trip, they would look at the tides, they would look at the salooner periods, and they would say, I'm looking at this day, I'm looking at the tides, and I'm looking at the salooners. Is this a good time to go? And I'm like, yes, that's perfect. So they were learning as we were going along in this whole situation. And I know I've done seminars about it before, but I think it's a very important. And when you see what the tides are doing this weekend and what we correlate with those slow tides during the quarter moon periods, people go out and they go and flats fish and they think, oh my God, this is, the bite is horrible. Why is the bite so bad? I was here a couple of days ago. Well, a couple of days ago, that tide's completely different than it is. Like right now, the tide's completely different than what it would be on Saturday, this coming Saturday. So those little changes in weather, changes in the barometric pressure. We were out 2 weekends ago, and I'm a weekend warrior now again. So I go fishing usually on the weekends. So I try to beat the crowds and do what we can. But those bluebird sky days when those fronts come through, even though it may not adjust the temperature, those bluebird skies are playing a major role in what those fish are feeling and what they want to do. We sat on 100 snook and caught 3. I mean, literally, I drove by him, half an hour later, come back, sit on the spot, and we caught three snook. And I told my dad, it was my dad and a friend of mine, or 2 of his friends, I said, this is why I don't guide anymore. It's because you sit on fish like that. You can't control Mother Nature. And that was the hardest part about doing what I did is...
I don't think it had anything to do with the weather. I think you're just a bad fisherman.
yeah. You wish. You wish.
You just need a horse to water. You can't make them drink.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, what we're going to do is kind of start the video and pause it as we go. We have some video of overheads of mullet schools, what we're looking for with the mullet schools, and we'll point out the fish. We literally had a snook about like this from me to Joel, and we never knew it was there. And I only caught it on the drone because my grandson was catching a snook, and I never saw it until I looked at the footage for the 3rd time and realized that this fish was literally 15 feet away from the boat at the max. But he was intermixed with the mullet schools.
He is so in love with that drone that one day I'm going to be over there and he's going to be like, it's going to be a drone and he'll just fly over.
The drone is a great tool.
Right, Brad? Doesn't he love that drone?
But what we're going to get, this first clip is what we're going to talk about. This is actually this coming Saturday's tide. as you see, starting about 7 o'clock in the morning, it's a flat tide until about 9:30. This tide indicates for me, I would go immediately snapper and grouper fishing in the bay, simply because, and I'll get into it a little bit more later because we're going to transition from flats fishing to Tampa Bay offshore fishing. But this is a great tide for snapper and grouper fishing. First of all, because when the tides are running strong, those grouper and snappers will sit on the bottom. I've got video footage of them sitting on the bottom, struggling to stay in one spot as the tide is ripping through. But as soon as the tide settles down, those fish come right off the bottom. And we have found that if you chum with even whole bait or cut bait or whatever, you can get those fish off the bottom. We did it on Friday night last week on a full moon. Brad was with me and my other buddy. We literally could see the screen come alive, and they came right up, and we were catching 3-pound snapper on free line baits. And so these are the tides that I like for Tampa Bay offshore fishing. Now, of course, you get a little bit better tide on the incoming starting at around 10 o'clock. Then it peaks out at around 5 o'clock. But between this time, it's not a real strong tide. But if you correlate it with the minor or major feeding time, which we'll get into, you can really, if you know where the fish are, you want to set up on that spot and say, okay, I'm going to fish this spot on the minor or major feeding time. And I'll explain the minors and majors.
No, I'm big on the minors and majors, but here's where I would be fishing. I'd be at night. I'd be out there when nobody's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reds, trout, snook, they're all, you know.
Yeah, we've done a couple of night shows, we've done one night show, and then we've done some just fishing ourselves up in Upper Tampa Bay for big trout.
I like to climb on this, so
Yeah.
I would be here at night. Do you guys know that reds hit at night? That you
Oh,
can
yeah.
catch reds with lures at night?
Wow.
If you know where to find them. I'm sorry?
I said under the Gandy.
Under the Gandy? No, not under the Gandy, up in the, well, maybe under the Gandy too, but around the mangroves and, well,
But-
you don't like the mangroves.
But Glenn, there's no water where you're talking about.
But that's a neat thing about having no water, is because I personally love the negative water tides.
Yeah, he likes it. I like the incoming, but I would take that. I would take that for snook. I would go after snook at night with that kind of.
I love the incoming, or the negative load. The lower the better for me. If I know I can get somewhere, because the fish are going to be, especially during the winter time, if I can get where I want to get, it's the fish in a barrel usually. Because I'll make the run to the Skyway to catch bait, because I'm just, that's who I am. I mean, when I fish out of the Roundabout, I fish artificial, but when I fish out of my big bay boat, I fish live bait, and I will make that 30-mile round trip to go catch bait and have the bait, because especially in the wintertime, more and more people are doing it now, but those fish are looking for protein, and they get stupid if the conditions are right. We've had 130 fish days when the conditions are right, and it's just knowing if you get a cold front that comes through, and then you get a day where it starts to climb in temperature, then you know that and you have good tides and everything has to align, but it can get absolutely stupid. But starting on, this is the salooner tables that I use. It's saloonerforecast.com. Looking at Saturday, so now you have the major feeding times. Can anybody tell me what causes the major feeding time?
Moon overhead, moon under.
Yes, moon overhead and moon underneath is where your major feeding times are. So you have a major feeding time at 5:45 to 7:45. So if we go back and we look at the tide, so and I don't know why I didn't pick up on this when I was guiding, but I started picking up on this. Whoops, sorry. I started picking up on this not too long ago, actually. Is that in the Tampa Bay area? God dang it! Sorry. The minors and majors are the majors, at least, always coincide with when the tide is almost ending. I never correlated it when I was guiding, but just recently I started correlating that the major feeding times were always when the tide was changing, or right near when the tide was changing. So you look at it, it's at 5:45 to 7:45. So you're looking at right where the tide is starting to end in the morning. So then you go to, so then you have your minor feeding times in the middle of the night, and then you have another one from 1 to 12, 1:09 to 12:09. Minor feeding times last an hour are 11 to 12:09. I'm sorry, 11:09 to 12:09. The minors usually last for an hour. The majors last for usually 2 hours. There's been days that I've been on the water that I had clients that would say, I want a 6-hour trip. I'm like, don't do a 6-hour trip. The tides are horrible. Do a 4-hour trip and we can hit this and this and this. Well, no, we're from New York. We just want to be on the water. And that worst thing that anybody could ever say to me. I just want to be on the water. Because that's not true. They're not taking a fishing trip to be just on the water. So this guy was a repeat client. He comes in with his wife. And for the first 2.5 hours, we caught 2 catfish. And he's up front telling his wife, I swear to God, honey, last time we were with him, we caught a ton of fish. And I went up to the front of the boat and I sat down and I said, look, at 4:15, these fish are going to eat the bottom of the boat for about an hour. The tide's going to stop before the major stops. And I said, then they'll stop. At 4:15, they were double hooked up for the next hour, and I think it was 10 minutes. They caught 65 trout between 18 and 25 inches. She quit in the middle of it and said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And she looked at me. She goes, how did you know? Because we sat in that spot for an hour and caught 1 catfish out of that spot. And then all of a sudden, it just like a light switch just turned on. And I said, we hit the major feeding time. We hit the tide right. We hit the major right. Everything fell into place. So I learned that these times are very important. Now I just go out and fish when I can. Being a weekend warrior, I get out and I fish when I can. But I do pay attention to these because I do want to be in a spot to where I know the fish are going to be staged up.
As a guide, you had specific spots, and so you needed to know when those fish were going to bite at that time.
True.
In my instance, now I won't lie to you, I did pay attention to majors and minors when I was doing the show, because sometimes I was on a weekly schedule. That meant I had to get fish. And so I would at least look at the major and see, okay, this is the time period. I'm looking at 2 hours before it and 2 hours after, depending on if I had the cameraman that day or that time period. But what I think is a little different in my approach is that Todd has a specific spot, especially when he's guiding, and if that spot doesn't work out, you go to another spot. With me, a lot of times when I was in the kayak, I couldn't go to that other spot. So what I had to do was learn patterns. And I had to learn not only that spot, I had to learn over here as they're coming into that spot. So I learned the whole terrain that was before me, or the area that we happened to pick for the fish that day. And then I would follow, including the major. As I was coming in, if I didn't find them there, I would start down here, and I would work my way there. And if they're not there, then I would go looking where they might be. And that could be potholes or any kind of just discrepancy in the terrain that holds them. When you say the mangroves, I wasn't a mangrove beater either. But
Beater eater.
But I was the one that would work it all the way down. When HUD would take us to a specific spot, and in Caladesi, I would go, okay, Jimmy, where are these fish coming from? Because if I come out here and I come to this spot and they're not there, I want to know where they're coming from or where they're going. That always ate at me, was the fact that they're at a certain spot. That's where their major feed is. I always wanted to know where their highway was. And so that was my approach, coming in and coming out.
Well, we just demonstrated that not too long ago when we went fishing in the Roundabout, where we found where those reds were staging up along that point where it came through, and they were staging up on the outside of the mangroves, to where we said, okay, the flow of the tide is coming in this way, and we staged ourselves to where we were working the lure with the tide, and those fish were out in the potholes and not up in. Even though it was a high tide, they weren't up in those mangroves; they were out in that area, but they were driving that lane that was in there. And I kind of do the same thing when I'm looking at you know, cuts that run along the mangrove islands or cuts that run out in the middle of the flat. You find a high or low tide, and there are certain cuts on these flats out there that will hold fish on a low tide because they have nowhere else to go. Now, can you stage up in there before that tide gets too low? Yes, you just got to get there. That's the thing, is knowing when to get there and when to stay there and stay through the tide. There's been times that I've had to stay through a tide, but I knew that the fish were going to come out of the mangroves and stage in one little area. And like I said, it was fish after fish, snook, redfish, one right after the other. But we had to sit there for a while because the tide had to, I literally had to push the boat out to get it out to where we needed to go. So it's some people pay attention to these things, some people don't. Now we're going to get into what we typically look for when we're on the flats. Now, this is an overhead video of mullet schools. I tell people all the time, and some people say, oh, well, I saw the mullet schools, or I was in the mullet schools and I didn't catch anything. You could be in a school of 1,000 mullet. It doesn't mean that those fish are absolutely there at that time. But what I have found with bigger mullet, not little mullet like this, but big mullet like this, when they're milling around, what they're doing is they're kicking up the bottom. And they're kicking up shrimp and crabs and bait fish and everything else. And that's why those fish are mixed in with these mullet.
Are those white dots mullet?
No, this is, there's a mullet here, there's a mullet here, and
That was
video.
a fish kill.
Yeah, no, this is all leaves. This is actually a little.
He's catching dead fish.
Yeah, this is actually a little tiny pond off of the main river, just up this way near our office. That I was flying the drone one day because I love to fly the drone when it's negative low tides during the winter because you can see where the fish are staged up and go, okay, I'm going to go there tomorrow. But this is a little pond that these fish are staged up in, and so you can see a bunch of mullet right in here. Yeah, these are clouds right here. Yeah. And then we're going to go to a different shot to where the water's a little bit clearer, but you can see the mullet here. That's the drone right there. See mullet here, mullet here. But when they're milling around like this and they're jumping and they're moving, is what I like to see. If they're not jumping, this is another. This is a bunch of mullet going along an oyster bed here that I was able to shoot.
Water drone.
Yeah, this was actually at my office. So I just stuck the GoPro in the water because I saw them going by, and I thought, well, I could use this for something.
Let's talk about the mullet for just a second. I think it was Cooper's Bayou. In the early days, I would fish that quite a bit. Now, I'm not. I don't really like the look of Cooper's Bayou. I don't like the algae in the back, and it's the water quality. You had mentioned the water quality, and I think there's some areas of Tampa Bay that need some help. But we had gotten out of the boat, me and Brian Epperson, and we were fishing the sand coming up to Cooper's Bayou that's similar to over a big island. It's just a big sand flat with some grass patches. But we were watching the mullet, and we were there early enough that the mullet were out, and we saw them come in a string, coming in towards the shoreline. And so I said to Brian, you sit here, or you stand here, and watch them come in front of you, and I'm going to go to the back side of them. So I'm going to go behind all that movement. They weren't milling around and jump. They were on the move, coming into onto the flat and over to the mangroves. And I found the reds behind them. Not mixed in, they were behind them. Now, whether they slept in late, I don't know, and they just missed the train. But sometimes, instead of when somebody says to you, "Well, I didn't find them in the mullet," sometimes those reds are on the fringe.
Most of the time they are.
Or snook.
Most of the time they are on the fringe. They're not mixed in with the mullet, which very rare do I find them actually mixed in with the mullet. They're always kind of on the fringe, coming in and out, and we have a prime example of that coming up. But that is a main thing that I look for, is activity on the flat. If I don't see birds, if I don't see mullet, if I don't see anything going on, I literally will just keep going. It does not feel comfortable to me. There has to be some kind of activity going on the open flat or along the mangroves. And one thing that I try to teach people is that when 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 you're fishing an area and you see the mullet school, and you know the tide's either going out or coming in, you watch the mullet school, because there's literally been times where we've been fishing up against the bank on an oyster bed, and we've been catching fish, and all of a sudden it just shuts off. There's no reason for it, but you watch the mullet are starting to move out. And when the mullets start to move out, I told my clients, turn around. Just start fishing from side and then the back. They turn around, started fishing from the side and the back, started catching fish again. Those mullet then continuously moved out to the potholes on that open flat. And we moved out with them, and the fish moved right along with them. Those mullet are always a great indicator of usually where the fish are going to be staying at. Sometimes you'll see mullet in this skinny of water,
Yeah.
but most of the time it's an indication of where those fish are going to be.
He went with me to do some nighttime trout in the wintertime. I like doing that. I use bright white lures. They look similar to ballyhoo that's stacked up in the upper bay, and I think that drives in the big trout. And we would get it into creek mouths, and those creek mouths have all these fingers that go way up in there, and so we would go, there would be little bayous or little openings here and there that we would step by step go in to find the trout. At times, and the mullet could be in there, and they're jumping. I don't remember if I think the mullet were on
They
the
were
outside.
still out, yeah.
But sometimes, in that scenario, sometimes that tide has started to move out, you're still up there, and I believe that those fish have already set up on the outside. So you're not catching anything up there where you were. They're already behind you and setting up on the outside on the ambush points for fish, bait coming out. And I think it happens earlier than, they trick me sometimes.
Yeah.
It's earlier than I think it is. It's before the tide turns, they're already going back out to set up.
So this is just kind of an underwater view of what I'm looking for, more of an overhead of the mullet swimming around, milling around. And like I said, this is what I look for when I'm out. This next shot that we're going to show is actually when we were fishing from our boat. Of course, we're catching in Jack Lavelle right here, but we're going to move off, and when we move off, and I'll pause it so you guys can, it might be hard for where you're sitting now, but see, there's mullet coming into the view here. There's mullet schools. I'm going to fly out from here. There's mullet moving in here. Now I'm going to fly out, and I'm going to stop. You see mullet swimming right here? There's a mullet here. Now, where did he go? Okay, there's mullet here, but the fish that are close to the very bottom are snook and redfish. So these fish that are milling around, all mullet here and here, but the fish that are closer to the bottom here and over here are game fish. So you see that they're kind of on the outside. They're not in the mullet themselves. But these mullet are constantly moving. But these fish, they move very little. And that's how I know that they're game fish.
How deep of water is it?
This is about 2.5 feet of water right here. So as you see, we're going through, seeing more mullet. There's tons of mullet on this flat. And this is a big, wide open flat. But as you see, there's another mullet, or another fish moving here with the mullet. But what I'm going to get to here in just a second, there's another couple of fish in the pothole here. But you see these mullet moving all around in here. And this is what I'm looking for. Now, this is kind of a prime example. I'm going to pause this real quick. This is my grandson catching a snook. Right here, there's a snook that we never saw. And this snook is big because he's probably in the mid 30-inch range. And he moved, he went and he stopped and he sat there right there and he watched us catch this fish. Now this fish is coming to the boat side. You'll see him, he's right here. I'm darkening it up a little bit, and he's going to turn. As this fish is splashing, he's right there. There he goes, he's turning, and he stops. And he's watching the whole thing right there. We never knew that this fish was here. He was all intermixed. There's all mullet in here and everything else. We never knew he was there. But this just goes to prove the fact that these fish are intermixed, not intermixed, but with the mullet. And this is what this is a classic thing that I look for. Is there's more footage that I had that there was mullet everywhere on this flat. But we never knew that he was there. We never caught him. We lost some bigger fish, and we had some fish fly by the front of the boat that we never saw either. But this is what we look for, and I love this kind of bottom right here. I love this kind of what I call salt and pepper bottom or broken bottom. I love this kind of bottom because it just has a tendency to, for some reason, hold the fish.
Well, it's a good mix. You know,
Yeah.
it's ambush predators. They want to blend in with their surroundings, and so if we lose the grass in Tampa Bay, we lose all the predator fish. This is a prime example of why Todd is a bad fisherman. He couldn't get that snook right there. It was right there. He didn't even see it.
No, we did not. So this is just, we just wanted to show that now we're getting into how we set up and what I look for on Google Earth. This particular shot is of Brad in the Roundabout, and what he's doing, he's throwing up tide against a mangrove shoreline, and he's working that bait as a natural presentation because the tide is coming this way. A lot of people say, well, does it really matter? Yes, it matters because the fish are facing this way. They're always facing into the tide. So if you're running a bait, so if he was stationed over here and he's running a bait against the tide, those fish are going to look at it and go, that's not right. That's almost nearly impossible for that bait to be going against the tide like it is, as fast as it is. So you always want to try to present, even if it's live bait, artificial, whatever, you want to try to present it to where it's, if you're using live bait, you can get away with fishing over here because you can literally just free line your bait, let your bait swim with the tide. So that is a natural act. But if you're throwing artificials, you want to go with the tide with the bait.
If you can't do that, the best case scenario is to go sideways.
Sideways, yes.
Yeah.
You don't. You want to try to avoid going against the tide completely.
Sometimes I've seen in kayaks and boats, people want to throw behind them. Mm-hmm. And the charter I had the other day, I do charters once in a while, and we did the Roundabout. It was a double-seater. And the fellow was really good. He was really good at casting. And I said, look, we were on the Little Manatee, and I said that probably most of the fish are out in the front because it's late spring. But what I want you to do is make very long casts as far as possible to give that fish all the space it needs to make the decision to hit your lure. And then sometimes, and he was making wonderful casts and up into the mangroves, and then a lot of times he was throwing behind us. And I said, there ain't nothing back there. Don't throw where we've been. Throw in front. Another thing I like to do, just while we're right here, is if I know there's fish there along these mangroves right here, and this is shallow, Sawyer Key, I don't know if you guys have fished Sawyer Key before in Fort DeSoto. It's been hammered a lot, but it used to be good. It still can be at times. The north side of Sawyer Key, sometimes those fish stack up along the mangroves. I'll anchor the kayak or the boat, and I'll walk up to where I can cast close to where those fish are. If it's an incoming tide, which I like, I'll cast with a bobber on it. Cut if I'm not using artificials, it's bait. Cut pinfish and on a bobber, and I'll let that bobber float on in. So what I'll do is I'll open up that bail and I'll back up even more, because what we've been talking about, so much pressure on these fish, the more chances you have at getting them, the better. And in this situation, I've given them a lot of space for them. If there's some coming this way or some coming this way, I've seen guys right there, right up against the mangroves, and the spaces between me and Todd, instead of way back here. Why not open that bail and just get back here and give them all that space to come this way and this way, or by you? The squeeze doesn't work anymore because of the pressure.
Okay. I always go to the classic 1, 2, 3 presentation. And what I mean by 1, 2, 3 presentation is that you have an oyster bed, you have sand, and then you have grass, or you have an oyster bed, sand, and then you have your potholes out here. on a high tide, the fish push up on these oyster beds. This is actually near Joe's Island. Some of you might even recognize this area. But what they'll do on a high tide,
That's my spot.
on a high tide, they'll push up on these oyster beds. And you can catch snook and redfish right in these two oyster beds. But as soon as that tide turns, you'll see the mullet that are also up in here. They'll start to move out into these potholes. And these potholes on a low tide are about 3 feet deep. So these fish move off these potholes. People think if they stop catching fish and the tide has changed and they're not catching any more fish, they think, well, we're done with this spot. Where they don't realize the fish has just moved, just like most of the time the fish aren't going very far. Period. They're just adjusting to what the tide is doing. And that's a classic thing that I've seen so many people do is just leave a spot.
It's a perfect picture of the highway.
Yeah.
So if they're leaving, then they're probably going to drop out to these right here.
Right.
The other situation that comes into play is, what if you come to your spot and there's a boat sitting right there?
Go to another spot.
Well, if there's plenty of space, and I'm not talking about squeezing them, but if they're here and you know that the tide is coming in and the fish might, there's
Oh
the
no,
highway.
you're far
So
enough
work
away.
the highway instead of the spot.
Right. If you can't hit them with your cast, then you're good. That's my thought.
Hit the boat, the people in the
Yeah,
boat.
the people in the boat. And I've done it plenty of times. But if you can't hit them, you're good. But if you, like you said, there's been plenty of times when I was guiding where I had people that were out where they should have been on a low tide, and I was up in a situation where I was catching fish on the shoreline. They were watching us do it. The next day we come in a different situation with a different tide later in the day. They were up here not catching anything. We pull out to where they were on the potholes, and we started catching fish.
These
Yes, sir.
snook and redfish and all that kind of stuff on a typical day, 2, 3, do they travel a long way for food like deer? They stay in a little 1 mile
They
area?
stay.
So do they move out, come back in 400 or 500 yards?
I found that they don't move. It depends on the time of year. Of course, as we progress into summertime, the snook are moving more towards the beaches and passes and sandy shorelines to do their mating thing. But normally, if you have the fish staged up in an area that you've seen them, they're going to stay there for a little while. And all they do is they adjust back and forth with the tides. Like on these flats out here, if there's a negative tide, I've got a couple of spots that I can get to them, but they're surrounded by sandbars, and there's a cut that runs through, and it runs the tide through, and there are potholes. And it's hard to get in there, but once you get in there, and if there's mullet jumping in those potholes, I know then that there's fish in there.
So these big snook that are cockroach bait, they're not going to be gaining ridge, do they?
No. They're pretty much,
No, I think, I'll give you the scenario of Picnic Island. I think Picnic Island, there's a lot of snook that share a territory. One night at Picnic, because I used to walk down the beach at Picnic Island when the security guard, I'd duck behind a dune, and when he's gone and it was closed, I'd walk on down there to the point. And one night I had gotten there, it was early in the year, and I saw a line at the Picnic Island pier. I saw a line of maybe 100 to 200 snook coming under the pier in a line, and they were funneling around. I think those snook spend most of their lives in that area, from the American Legion flats to behind Picnic Island and what I call the old Picnic Island, the true Picnic Island, which is all those mangroves in the back of the lagoon. The Picnic Island that you know now was 3 keys that were filled in to make a park in the 1960s. The original Picnic Island was in the back. But I think all those snook stay there, and they use that point of Picnic Island as their spawning area. So those are snook that aren't going to go to Pass Grill. The Pass Grill snook are snook from that area, probably Shell Key and those areas. But on a typical day, if their pattern isn't being manipulated by, finding a mate, or it's real cold, then they're going to stay in their patterns, and they're going to stay in a specific area. Does that kind of answer what you mean?
There's snook that aren't leaving the alpha.
yeah, oh yeah.
Their beach is right outside.
Mm-hmm.
that little beach
Exactly.
just north as you spin around.
Yeah, I think the misconception is that all the snook go out to the beaches,
Yeah.
but it's not.
True.
There are snook that haven't left, I hate to say this out loud because I love it so much, Bishop's Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
If you can go back to Bishop's Harbor on a cold morning in February, where you know it's going to warm up. But Tiger and I have seen back in some of those back areas, 200 fish. So cold that they're just laying right there. They're not even moving. But let it get to 10 o'clock and all of a sudden it's 67 degrees and they sort of, the next thing you know, they're just sort of, you throw a shrimp out in front of them, you might, that's how you're going to catch them. On a cold, windy day one year, back if you go into Bishop's, all the way down on the north side of it, the tide was running out, and the water was as gin clear. There was a snook that we saw probably 200 yards away. And we snuck in, and Tiger flipped a shrimp in front of it and moved it once and let it sit. And finally, and there was only fish we caught that day, but it's a 24-inch snook in the middle of February. Well, it was President's Day. So, it's a matter of knowing, but they're not, those fish aren't going anywhere.
No, they're not moving very far.
That's in their areas, they come out in Joe's Island or just right there at Manbury Key, and that's where they do their spawn.
Yep.
Yeah, and May and June is the prime time for the spawning. And so I believe also these snook gather in great numbers. Sometimes you can't get them to bite because they're paying attention to each other, but they gather in great numbers, and where their territory is, they're probably looking where the current moves the quickest and for the spawn to happen. And a picnic, it's over there by those rocks. If you know where if you've been to picnic, you know those rocks. I believe that's their spawning area. Other places, you know of any other places?
Well, the Port
where they
Manatee
gather?
Island used to be huge for when I was guiding. It was before it was closed off, or not closed off, but before you had to have the pass to get in there. And it was so stupid during the summertime because those fish were spawning. I literally was catching snook next to my boat on bare hooks. It was so stupid. And we would go there and we'd catch 90 to 100 snook and not even blink an eye. From the guys that I know that still go there, it's not like that anymore. They say it's completely different. The snook don't stack up in there. I'm not quite sure why or what's going on with that. But, I mean, we were literally channel fishing Friday night and I caught a snook in 30 plus feet of water. So you never know where they're going to be. Some of these fish will go offshore in just deeper water to do their thing.
Shell Key is a big spawner, and still is.
Shell Key.
Shell Key sometimes on the Passive Grill side, sometimes on the inside, Bunson's Pass. But I've done a lot of scouting with Doug Hemmer and Tommy Ziesman, and we've seen the big gathering of it, and it's still there. I think picnic is still healthy in that respect as well.
This is another situation that I'd love to look for, is that you have docks that come out. This is up in Terracea. I'm not going to hide anything, but you have the bait. When a low tide, the bait drops off into here, but the high tide, the bait comes up in here, and you can see where the ledge is right here. And a lot of times, those fish on a very high tide will push up right against this shoreline, and they'll bust. There's bait always up in here, and they'll sit there and bust bait left and right. But as soon as that tide turns and starts to go out, they start to gather right on this ledge right here, and it can get really stupid. But this is what I look for in that transition area. I'm always looking for where are the fish going to transition. Where are they going to move from a high tide to a low tide, or from a low tide to a high tide? So I understand if I'm coming in, I'm at a mid-level tide, then I know that those fish are probably going to be up in here. Or if I'm at a lower tide, they're still going to be on the edge right here. I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone over an area and just watched what the fish are doing, where they're staged at, what the mullet are doing. So I'm always looking, and at the same time, those mullet are always staged right in that area, depending on where the tide is.
I want to let you guys know that I live right about here. There's another spot shot. right up in there. Now, if that area right there had a sandbar, which Upper Bay has
Right.
sandbars here and there, I would be on this side of the sandbar as the tide's coming in to see if they're coming across. I had a scenario with big trout where I couldn't tell if they were coming across the sandbar from deeper water or they were coming from a deeper area over here. And I'm not quite sure if I've got it solid, but one day I decided to just camp out on this side of the sandbar and watch that sandbar from my point, and I saw big trout going across it, so I knew instead of coming from over here down the mangrove line, they were coming straight in.
And that's what we experienced when we went last time, is they were coming off that.
Yeah.
Now this is let me get the videos. Let me get the camera straight up here. This is on the shipping channel in Tampa Bay. Let me get a clear picture. Okay, you can see the undercuts of what they did when they dug the channels, and you can see the ledges where these fish are hanging. This is the top of the channel up here, and you can see the rocks and stuff like that. The snapper fishing, or the snapper running in here. As I said before, this was taken on a very slow tide, so those fish were out moving around and everything else. On the slower tide that I showed before, what happens is those fish come right up off the bottom. They're swimming 10 to 15 feet above the bottom at some point, and that's why they're easy to chum to get up to the surface. We've had snapper like this, and I'm not lying. I've watched it with my own in our chum slick that were probably close to 8 pounds. Our biggest snapper that we've caught is 5 pounds at about close to 23 inches long. We continuously catch 3 to 4 pound snapper. We caught what? We caught a few three pounders this last Friday night. And they were spitting up chummers as we were getting them into the boat. They were continuously just spitting up chummers. And my buddy who cleaned them, he says, Todd, one of them had 8 chummers, 8 cut up pieces of bait in his stomach. This is the type of fishing that I like to do when the tides are slow. And then as the summer progresses, the snapper fishing gets even better. And this is another reason, is because there's so many people on the flats. I want to get away from that. And I'll show you a couple of rigs that we like to use when we're typically flats fishing, or not flats fishing, but when we're freelining baits. And when we say freelining, we typically it's a 1/0 to 2/0 hook, and we use 20-pound leader. I use nothing heavier than that. We used 30 the other night, but it was at nighttime, so we got away with it. But what we do is, I don't know if anybody has watched when you down in the Keys when they do the free line for the yellowtail, where they typically just drop the bait in the water and they just free line it and let it go. And what we do is, you'll see a lot of times that we'll pull our rod like this to let out line, but we don't want that bait. Even if it's a cut bait, we don't want the cut bait to jump like it's unnatural. We want it floating down just like the regular cut bait. A lot of times what we do is we just watch our line, and as soon as we see that line either tick or it takes off, we just, of course, flip it and go. And this is how we catch the majority of our really big snapper, is free lining with our natural inshore rods. Now, when the tides are running a little bit harder and we want to get the bait to the bottom, we've tried everything. We've tried the big spinning gear. We've tried everything. We have found that using a small conventional rod with 20-pound leader, not even leader, 20-pound fluorocarbon. This one is a 1.5. The tide was pretty slow, so we're using a 1.5 ounce knocker rig. And we were using, this is a little bit of a big hook, but we're using about a 3/0 hook on this. The reason why we've gone to these is because we catch a combination of grouper and snapper. When you catch a 3 to 4 pound snapper, they're a beast trying to get off the bottom. We break off a lot on 20, but we try to jump to 30, and they don't react the same. We don't get the same bites. The 20 has been really good for continuous bites. But one thing that we have found too is that when we drop it to the bottom, we don't keep the bait right against the sinker. What we do is we flip our bail and we let the bait swim away from the sinker. So we let out line like this, and you can feel the bait swimming away. We found that the snapper like it like that. The snapper and grouper, they don't like the bait up against the sinker at all because it's not natural. As soon as you get it away from the sinker, they'll hit it. And if they hit it once and they don't take it, they'll mark it, they won't eat it again. Very rare will they eat it. Every once in a great while, they'll eat a hit bait. But if they hit it once and you don't get them, change your bait. Because they, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but as soon as they hit it and they don't take it, they won't eat it again. That's what we have found when we're snapper and grouper fishing inside the bay. Now, from here to the Port Manatee, we bought a Humminbird Solix with the mega side imaging. We have over 200 waypoints between here and the port. I haven't even gone past the port yet. We haven't even fished 3/4 of the numbers that we have. There's that many small rock piles. Now, if you have a boat that has the GPS trolling motor, you set up on those, it's easy to set up those, but when you're trying to anchor, it's almost nearly impossible because some of them are very tiny, as small as this row of seats.
Right.
But they're there.
All the way to St. Pete Pier, well,
Yeah.
where it was.
Yeah.
There's rock piles all the way to there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't have, I know a few of you have kayaks. One of the main snapper places that I used to fish for the show was Demon's Landing on the big rocks, especially in the springtime. And near dusk, on a good tide, I caught some bigger snapper in there. The biggest I've caught in the bay has come from those inside rocks of Demon's Landing. Also, well, Port Tampa, American Legion Flat, I've caught a few. They're not a huge congregation of them, but I've caught a few about like that. That's a good snapper for inside the bay. Again, this was at nighttime. The Port Tampa American Legion area, all that rock pile along there. And also Davis Island. The Davis Island area has also been a good snapper. In case you don't have the boat to get out into the channel like you're talking about, there are places to get snapper with your kayak or smaller boat.
And there's a lot of places that are off the channel itself that are rock piles that it takes time to find them, but if you can find them, those are even less pressured than the ones on the edge of the shipping channel. But there's a ton out there. There's things that I never knew that were out there that I found with our new depth finder, that small little ledges that are just loaded with fish, and it's been a big help. But one thing that I want to share, and I usually don't share this too much.
I had a question about, you said side imaging. Is that the same as side scan?
Yeah, side scan, side imaging. Yeah, Lawrence